Welcome back to Land Matters, the podcast of the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. I'm your host, Anthony Flint. For so many years, Berkeley, California, has been confronting all the pushing and pulling of super successful cities, a roaring innovation economy, a college town, a popular place to live, perched up on the East Bay and minutes from Oakland and San Francisco, all of it putting incredible pressures on housing, boiling over with an affordability crisis, rampant real estate speculation, and homelessness. Much of the narrative has been framed in terms of two opposing camps, those saying essentially, not in my backyard, and a more recent group under the label YIMBY, yes in my backyard, that is supporting more housing development. Into this scenario comes Jesse Arreguín, elected mayor in 2016, becoming the first Latino to hold office, and at 32, the youngest mayor in a century. He was reelected with over 65% of the vote in 2020. The son and grandson of farm workers, Arreguín grew up in San Francisco. At 9, he helped lead efforts to name a city street after activist Cesar Chavez, and so began a lifelong commitment to social justice. After he graduated from the University of California, Berkeley, he stayed on in the city, serving on boards including the Housing Advisory Commission, Rent Stabilization Board, Zoning Adjustments Board, Planning Commission, and City Council. He's also now president of the Association of Bay Area Governments, the Bay Area's regional planning agency, and also Council of Governments. He came into office mindful of the established residents who often expressed skepticism about new housing development and any additional height and density, and how that all might fit into the urban fabric. Add the impacts of climate change, thorny issues of crime and public safety, and ongoing demand to improve the streetscape for bicyclists and pedestrians, and this young mayor has his hands full as chief executive of this metropolis of nearly 117,000. I had the opportunity to sit down with him in person at Berkeley City Hall recently. Now, we were on the 5th floor, and true to form, there was all kinds of construction going on outside as workers reconfigured a street and other building renovations were underway. So you might hear some of that sound in the background, but here's my conversation with Jesse Arreguín, mayor of Berkeley, California. It seems like Berkeley has become a symbol of the YIMBY-NIMBY divide. I'd like to ask you at this moment, what more should developers be contributing to increase supply, provide different housing options, and density at appropriate locations?
I think a lot needs to be done by government, whether it's establishing parking minimums and maximums to reduce the need for significant amounts of parking when you build new housing. Berkeley is a very dense community. I think we have one of the highest bike-to-work rates of any city of our size in the United States. We want as much as possible to reduce the need for people to rely on cars as their primary means of transportation. And obviously, we know that parking adds significant costs to building housing and also takes away critical square footage that could be dedicated towards housing people, not cars. We've also made a commitment that we're going to end exclusionary zoning. And I think part of the reason why Berkeley is a symbol of, I think, the debate that's happening in cities throughout the country is because Berkeley is the birthplace of exclusionary zoning. In 1916, the city of Berkeley adopted its first zoning ordinance to zone the neighborhoods in the Elmwood district as single family to prevent the construction of a dance hall in the exclusive Elmwood district. Not surprisingly, many of the people that would frequent that dance hall would predominantly be African American and people of color. And so sadly in Berkeley, single family zoning was founded on the foundation of racial exclusion. And I'll just say personally that my perspective on zoning and on housing issues has evolved over the years. And I think it's really evolved because the crisis in Berkeley and in California has worsened significantly in the past 5 years. We have increasing numbers of people who are experiencing homelessness, tent encampments on our streets, working families that can't afford to live in the community that they work in, students that can't afford to live in the community that they go to school in. We have a critical shortage of student housing here in Berkeley. And so the status quo is not working. And we need to take bold action. And I'm really pleased that California is leading the way in addressing the issues of housing production. We need to continue to streamline our regulations to make it easier to build housing. We need to promote innovation in building housing through codes and through incentives to look at modular housing, mass timber, There's projects going up throughout California now that are mass timber high rises to look at ways that we can reduce the costs of producing housing, to do more to promote ADUs and missing middle housing, which is much more affordable to build. And we need to focus on affordability. We know that it's going to take some time for us to build our way out of this crisis. And so for now, we really have to focus on how government, through regulation and through funding, can significantly increase the supply of permanently affordable housing, not just for people experiencing homelessness, but for seniors, persons with disabilities, students, working families. I think developers are eager to see leadership on the part of government. We need to meet them at the middle, and we have to do what we can to make it easier for them to build. But at the same time, we also have to make sure that they are providing community benefits while we are seeing new market rate construction, particularly in communities where we've seen significant amounts of displacement and gentrification. And we certainly have those challenges here in Berkeley. We have neighborhoods, historically Black neighborhoods, where we're seeing homes sell at $2 million. Our Black populations decline from 20% in 1970 now to 7%. And I think that is a direct result of the decisions that government made to not build housing and of the astronomical cost of housing in Berkeley. And so this is also really critical to keeping Berkeley an economically diverse community, something that we really value. If you've seen the city's logo, our city's seal is the faces of our diversity. But really that diversity is threatened by the acute housing shortage and affordability crisis that we're facing here in our community.
Well, let's talk about gentrification and real estate speculation, which is a problem in many cities. Los Angeles recently started a program of land banking parcels near transit stations, which seems incredible in a way that you would have to do that. But is that the kind of thing that is going to be necessary when you're obviously in such white-hot market conditions here?
We need to prioritize public land for public good. There's no question about that. And so the city is looking at all of our sites, our senior centers, our parking lots that could be repurposed for housing. I do agree we need to look at land banking. We need to provide money so nonprofit developers can buy parcels to keep them permanently affordable. We need to look at how we can support land trusts, not just buying properties, but buying buildings to keep them permanently affordable. And that is part of Berkeley's housing strategy. It's not just building new construction, but also preservation of existing naturally occurring affordable housing. One of the other roles I play, I'm sure we'll talk about this in the course of our conversation, is the president of our Council of Governments in the region, the Association of Bay Area Governments. And we actually created the first regional housing finance agency in the state of California, the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority, which we launched a year ago. We hope to be able to go to the Bay Area ballot in 2024 to put on the Bay Area ballot a $10 billion bond to generate funding for affordable housing production and preservation. But one of the things that we are exploring right now is this very issue of working with transit agencies, working with government agencies to see what surplus property exists so that we can preserve those properties for affordable housing. And the state has adopted legislation in recent years requiring that surplus property by government agencies be used first and foremost for housing. So whether it's through state law, whether it's through regional initiatives or local action, I think this is going to be important, particularly in very dense communities like Berkeley that don't have a lot of available opportunity sites. And those sites are highly competitive, that we need to look at how we preserve land that could be dedicated to affordable housing and how we preserve existing buildings, because we're also not going to be able to build enough new affordable housing to be able to address the critical need for permanent, affordable, de-restricted housing. So preservation of existing affordable housing is going to be a really critical strategy for us to prevent displacement and also to keep our city diverse and affordable. And so I think we need to focus on the 3 Ps: production of new housing, preservation of existing naturally occurring affordable housing, and protection of existing residents from displacement. Those 3 Ps are really critical.
As a follow-up, how might a vacancy tax, similar to what we see in San Francisco and Oakland, address this fundamental issue of the burgeoning value of land? At the Lincoln Institute, we're all about land, and it's such a critical factor in urban development. Are you interested in that or other versions of the land tax?
We actually placed on the ballot just a couple of weeks ago a residential vacancy tax, which is a little bit different from Oakland's in that it doesn't focus on vacant parcels, but it's focused on vacant homes and vacant residential units. And San Francisco has also qualified a similar measure for their ballot this November. And there are some that have said, well, we have thousands of vacant units and therefore we don't need to build more housing. That's absurd. We need to build housing, and we also need to take housing that is off the market and put it back on the market. All those things are really critical. To the extent that there are existing multifamily buildings, and you drive around Berkeley, you see some of them that are boarded up, to the extent there are thousands of units of housing that are not on the market, and there are, I think that's criminal, to be quite honest with you, in a time of an extreme housing shortage. And we need to look at how we can get that housing back online. And in some cases, it's because owners don't have much of an incentive to put that housing back on the markets. It may require significant rehab as well. And so we have to look at what tools does government have to get new units on the market, not just ADUs, not just building new multifamily properties, but also getting vacant units back on the market. We've seen properties that have been taken off the market for short-term rentals. That also creates, I think, a shortage of our supply. So the more that we can address actions by speculators and by scofflaws, I would characterize people that keep properties blighted and vacant for many years as scofflaws, it will address the artificial constraining of the market and will put more units back on the market. And so, we spent a lot of time crafting this vacancy tax and really thought through the situations in which units could be vacant legitimately. And the focus is not on small property owners, but on owners of large rental properties, because part of what we are seeing is, frankly, speculation in the market. And so we do think that this could help put online 1,000 or more units of housing that's currently vacant. And we hope at some point we don't have to charge a tax because all the housing is being rented or is being used. That's the goal of the vacancy tax, not to penalize, but to incentivize owners of multifamily properties to use the properties for their intended purpose, for housing. But I just have to say once again that this is not a panacea. This is not the solution to the housing crisis, and that we need to build new housing. That the perspective by some people who are fiercely opposed to building market rate housing, that we just have a lot of vacancies and therefore we need to rent those units. That's not true. The data does not support that. And what we have is a crisis that is decades in the making through deliberate actions on the part of government, through racial segregation and redlining, and through fierce resistance to building housing and policies that have constrained the production of housing. And now we're in a crisis. And I think a crisis and emergency requires that we take emergency action. And that's why in Berkeley, we are embracing building more housing, and we will continue to build lots more housing because we think that is the solution to addressing our housing crisis.
I want to take a step back and consider the bigger picture. When you think about it, Berkeley as a hub of innovation, a lot of cities would actually like to be in your position here with such a thriving economy. I want to ask you, do you believe it's really going to be possible for more or all workers in Berkeley to be able to live in Berkeley? Or is there some sort of built-in imbalance that you just have to manage and come to terms with?
I think it's possible. Every part of our city needs to meet its responsibility to create more housing. No part of our community can be walled off to new people living here. And I really do think that gets to the core of who we are, who we say we are as a city. Are we a city of equity and inclusivity? If we are, then we need to welcome new people living in our community and create those opportunities for people to live here. People that previously lived here and were displaced, people that work here but can't afford to live here. And obviously there's a climate benefit. We can get people to not have to drive an hour, 2 hours to get to Berkeley. That reduces those cars on the road, reduces greenhouse gas emissions, and helps us mitigate the impacts of climate change. And building dense transit-oriented development is a critical part of taking bold climate action. And we do believe that our land use policies and our actions to encourage more dense housing in our city is a really critical climate action strategy. And we do have a significant jobs housing imbalance in the Bay Area. Alameda County, I will say, is doing better than many other counties. Our jobs housing imbalance is 4-1, as opposed to, I think, Santa Clara County, which is 10-1. Not surprisingly, we have built huge campuses for major tech businesses and bring thousands of employees, but don't build the housing. That's going to migrate the impact on other communities in the Bay Area. And I think while the investment and incredible economic progress and growth that we've seen in the Bay Area is, I think, tremendous, we didn't take care of the housing problem. And you can't really promote innovation and economic progress without also addressing the housing problem. So I do think I think it's possible. It requires leadership. We are in the process of developing our housing element of our general plan. California, every 8 years, local governments, counties and cities have to update their housing element of their general plan, their land use plan, to plan for meeting the regional housing need. In the Bay Area, my agency, Association of Bay Area Governments, we approved a plan to allocate 400,000 units to all the 101 cities and towns in 9 Bay Area counties to meet the regional housing need. Significantly more housing than the region's ever had to plan for before. And we were very intentional in determining what cities have to plan for housing to address issues like economic segregation, to focus on those communities that are producing jobs, having to create more housing to address that job growth. And not surprisingly, Berkeley being a center of innovation and economic progress, our requirements have increased by 200%. But we will meet those requirements. We will exceed those requirements because we think it's going to be really critical to continue to promote that climate of innovation. And I do think part of what makes Berkeley special is its history of innovation. And I think we are looking at innovation not just in terms of scientific research, but from a government perspective, innovation in creating public policy. I do see Berkeley as kind of an innovation lab, a test lab for new approaches to public policy, which is why we're really thinking intentionally about how we can create solutions to housing and homelessness and a lot of the other challenges facing cities in 2022. We can't address the jobs housing imbalance, but we're going to have to produce housing, and it's going to really require that we do everything we can to get those units built.
Final two questions, and they're related. Could you talk about the importance of bicycle and pedestrian safety in your overall view of how the city functions and how Berkeley is doing in that regard?
Because we have such high numbers of people who bike to work and walk and use alternative modes of transportation, we need to make it safer and easier for people to get around town. Sadly, we've seen an increasing number of collisions between cars and bicyclists and pedestrians. Like many communities, we've adopted a Vision Zero policy that's focused on reducing traffic injuries and fatalities. And we are looking at how we can redesign and reconstruct our streets to make them safer for people that walk and bike, not just through the bike facilities, the protected bike lanes that we're putting in, such as literally outside of my office here on Milvia Street. We have an east-west protected bike route, the first major protected bike route that we built in Berkeley in our new bike plan, but also looking at road diets as a way to slow down traffic, make traffic safer. And I think it's going to be critical to also Berkeley meeting its climate action goals, because while, yes, we want to encourage people to transition towards electric vehicles, and there's a lot we need to do there. And we're working on building electric vehicle charging infrastructure and parking lots and the public right of way. We're looking at how to convert buses and other heavy duty vehicles to electric. Addressing our climate emergency is not just going to be solved through electric vehicles. It's going to be through the decisions that we all make on a daily basis to reduce our carbon footprint. We need to do more to redesign our streets. We need more proactive enforcement. We need to look at things like automated speed enforcement through cameras as a way to reduce speeding and to deal with people that are breaking the law. All those things, speed limits, and California's passed laws recently to allow cities to set lower speed limits on certain high injury corridors in your schools and your senior homes. And so we are invoking that authority and looking at lowering speed limits in certain parts of our city where we know that speeding is an issue and where those collisions have occurred. I think all those things matter. As we say, education is critical, enforcement, and engineering. All those 3 E's are going to be really important to making our streets safer. And then obviously being the home of the University of California, we have a lot of young people that are constantly walking, biking around, and we need to make it safer for students and for our residents to get out of their cars and to choose non-carbon intensive modes of mobility. It's really critical.
On climate, what else can Berkeley do? In conclusion here, you've talked about this a couple of times, this more regional approach, and that seems tailor-made for responding to the climate crisis. How have you found your neighboring communities pitching in on this? Is there a coordinated effort? Of course, there are various statewide initiatives, but how is the region addressing the climate crisis?
Well, I think the best way for Berkeley to address the climate crisis is through recognizing, one, it's not a crisis, it's an emergency. And we see the real material effects of it here in California. We've had some of the most devastating wildfires in California history over the last 5 years. Berkeley is not immune from the threat of wildfire. 1991, there was a devastating fire that destroyed thousands of homes and took the lives of 25 individuals who lived in the Berkeley-Oakland Hills, the Oakland-Berkeley Hills firestorm. And seeing what's happening throughout California, that fear is on the minds of many people who live in the Berkeley Hills because we're on the wildland-urban interface. And then obviously 2017, we all remember, and in 2020, very apocalyptic orange skies that really consumed the region. That's a pretty telltale sign that the climate emergency is here. It's not going away, and that we have to recognize that we need to take bold action. So I'm proud that Berkeley has really been a leader in combating climate change. We were one of the first cities in 2009 to adopt a climate action plan to really have a strategy for how we're going to address climate change from a multidimensional level, not just on land use, transportation, waste, energy, how we build buildings. Obviously, building dense infill housing is a critical part of that. The less that people have to drive, the more that people can walk and bike to get to and from school, work, their daily activities, the more that reduces our carbon footprint. We do need to promote more electric mobility, whether it's through micromobility or through converting heavy-duty and light-duty vehicles to electric, and California has really been a leader at that. While there are very ambitious targets that the state has set to transition our vehicle fleet to electric, we don't have the infrastructure to support that yet. And so that's really an area we hope with the new federal bipartisan infrastructure law and the climate law that was just passed, that there'll be significantly more resources available that we can leverage to expand that infrastructure in California. It's going to be critical. So electric mobility is important. Electrifying our buildings is important too. And Berkeley was the first city in California to adopt a ban on natural gas and to require that newly constructed buildings be all electric. And we're also looking at how we can get existing buildings to be electric, which is much tougher, whether it's converting gas-powered appliances to electric or whether it's actually doing more intensive electrification of existing homes and multifamily buildings. So electrifying our buildings is critical. Getting off gas is critical. Reducing the need for natural gas or fossil fuels. And then I do think how we individually on a daily basis get to and from and promoting non-carbon intensive modes of transportation is really critical. All those things are important, but we also have to adapt to climate change. These solutions can't be solved by one city. They need global, national, state, regional solutions. And so a lot of work's been done at the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and Association of Area Governments, our regional planning agency and council of governments, to bring government agencies together to explore strategies. So from a transportation standpoint, how we plan for and how we fund transportation needs to also focus on how we mitigate greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. But also there's a lot of conversation, not just on housing, but on climate adaptation and looking at a regional approach to how we address sea level rise, a regional approach to how we address and mitigate the impacts of climate change. And I think that's an area where regionalism and regional government is going to make a difference. Not just how we can best coordinate, but also if you leave planning decisions, if you leave the actual zoning decisions to each community, it's not going to work. You're not going to make an impact. So it needs a coordinated regional approach. The crisis is not going away, and we have to take action to mitigate climate change, but also we have to take action to live with the impact, sadly, of climate change, which we'll be living with for many years to come.
Mayor Jesse Arreguín, thank you for this conversation.
Thank you.
And now you can read an edited version of this interview at Landlines Magazine, the latest installment of the Mayor's Desk feature, our Q&As with chief executives of cities from all around the world. Just go to our website, lincolninst.edu. And that is it for this episode of the Land Matters podcast. As usual, we hope you'll rate, share, and subscribe so you never miss a show. Much more about cities and confronting challenges and coming up with innovative solutions, all coming up in future shows. Don't forget also to follow the Lincoln Institute on Twitter. The handle is @LandPolicy. So until next time, I'm your host, Anthony Flint. Thanks for listening.